Hello beautiful friends, my name is Brittany, this is Rescues and Reads. Welcome back or welcome to the channel. I'm so grateful that you are here. Today we are here to talk about all of the books that I read in the month of January. Now I apologize that this video is coming to you a little bit late. I had a few other videos that I really wanted to get up prior to this one, but also I had to kind of convince myself to film this video. Y'all know that I really struggle with doing wrap-ups. They are one of my least favorite videos to film, and so I was very tempted to just go ahead and skip this entirely, but we're here and we are going to do it. And with that being said, y'all know that I cannot be short and sweet with my reviews. I just do not have that ability, so you might want to grab a snack, grab a drink, get cozy, because we could be here for a minute. Now, before we talk about all of the books that I read and the ones that I actually DNF'd, let's go ahead and talk about a few bookish stats for the month. So in the month of January, I successfully completed 12 books, and that was a total of 4,099 pages. In terms of ratings, I had 1 2-star, 1 2.5 star, 1 3-star, 2 3.5 stars, 4 4 stars, and 3 4.25 stars for an average rating of 3.6. So it wasn't necessarily the best rating month in terms of quality. I had a few duds in there. In terms of genres, I read 2 that I classified as contemporary fiction, 3 that I classified as fantasy, 1 as historical fiction, 1 as literary fiction, 1 as romance, and 3 as thrillers. I listened to 11 of these books entirely via audio, and then 1 was a mixture of physical and audio. 11 of the books were standard novels and 1 was a novella. 4 of the authors that I read in January were new to me and 8 were authors that I had read from before. 10 of the books that I read were for adult audiences and 2 I would classify as for young adult audiences. And then in terms of years, they were all pretty recent. 2 of the books that I read were published in 2026. In fact, they were advanced listener copies. 3 of them were from 2025. 5 of them were from 2024. And then I had 1 from 2018 and 1 from 2021. In January, I felt like I was in a really weird headspace, a really weird mood. Because January is one of the busiest months at my job, in combination to the fact that I started my capstone class, which has been absolutely insane and incredibly overwhelming, I felt like I did not have a lot of patience with books in January. And if a book was not immediately capturing my attention and getting me hooked and invested, I had no patience for it. I did not want to work for any of the books that I was reading in January. And so as such, I ultimately had 5 books that I started and put down. Now, 3 of these books, I'm considering them an official DNF, and the other 2 I am not considering an official DNF just because I didn't get far enough into them to feel comfortable calling them a DNF. Typically, if I'm only within the first few pages or a couple of chapters of a book and I put it down, I kind of consider that like my free trial, right? I started my free trial, I determined it wasn't for me, and then I canceled before I could be charged. I don't really feel comfortable classifying those as DNFs because I really don't feel like I have enough concrete thoughts to confirm why I did DNF. I just knew that they were not what I wanted to be reading at the time. As such, I really do know that some of these books really could have been right books, wrong time. And there is one book that I may go back to, but the other 4 are firmly DNFs. So the 2 that I had my free trial on were Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. I literally was probably only 5 pages into that story before I determined that it really just wasn't for me and I wasn't going to continue. And then Dark Sisters by Kristi, DiMeester, which was a very big surprise for me considering how much I was interested in reading that story. I thought it was going to be right up my alley, but just within the first couple of chapters, it was very different from what I was expecting. I was a little bit bored. I wasn't able to get into it very quickly, and as I just mentioned, I had no patience for that. So even though it probably was going to turn out to be an amazing read, I just didn't have the patience to get there. So those were 2 that I put down very early on. Now, 2 of my official DNFs are actually by the same author, so I really want to talk about them at once. They are Once and Future Witches, as well as The Everlasting. I've talked about this before, but I loved Starling House. That was my first experience with Alix Harrow, and I was hooked, but I swear that book is so incredibly different from anything else that I've tried from her, and it's so disappointing. So I read The 10,000 Doors of January and I struggled through it. I almost DNF'd it multiple times. I don't know if I was struggling with the historical aspect of it. I don't know if I was struggling with somewhat of the whimsical nature of it. I don't know if I was struggling with the fact that it was a younger protagonist. I don't know, but there was a lot about that story that really didn't work for me. And I went into Once and Future Witches knowing it was going to be historical, but I thought that because it was a witchy read, it was going to work for me. And unfortunately, I would say that I got maybe around 2 hours into the audiobook and I just was not vibing with it. I wasn't able to ground myself in the story. When I begin a story, I actually really like a slow start. I want to be able to ground myself in the world. I really want to understand the characters, where we are and what is happening. And while in Once and Future Witches, I feel like I had a pretty good grasp on who we were following. It was following 3 estranged sisters. Everything else just kind of felt like a little bit abstract to me, and it was probably the writing. I wouldn't necessarily say that Alix Harrow has super purpley prose, but her prose was just lyrical enough to the fact that it wasn't straightforward, and I wasn't necessarily understanding all that I was reading, especially in terms of the magical aspects that were happening. And again, I just had no patience for it. I didn't really want to try to have to figure out what was going on, so I started to become really frustrated while I was reading the story, and I put it down. Again, could this be a book that I would have loved in a different time? Absolutely, but I don't think that I will be going back to it now. I do think that I will be going back to The Everlasting, even though it really does not sound like a Brittany book. And I knew it when I read the synopsis of this. I went into this one very, very trepidatiously, but I've heard so many people fall in love with this story, and I really do want to give it at least one other shot. And I think I might wait until I'm in a different kind of headspace and where I can take my time with it and maybe immersively read it and then give it another chance, because I refuse to believe that I am not able to like any other books by the person who wrote Starling House. I refuse to believe it. There has to be another Alix Harrow out there for me, and I really want that to be The Everlasting, considering how many amazing things I've heard about it. So I'm going to give that one more try. So that's a soft DNF for right now. But the other firm DNF that I will not be going back to is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. I think I've just determined that T. Kingfisher is not the author for me, and that is absolutely fine. I really didn't think they were going to be. I kind of knew that they were not going to be, but because she is the current author spotlight in my Patreon, I had to at least give these a try. And I definitely got a couple of hours into the audiobook of The Hollow Places before I determined that I just was not vibing with it. So I put it down. Now let's go ahead and start talking about the books that I actually did finish. So the very first thing that I finished in the year of 2026 was The Fall Risk by Abby Jimenez. This is actually a novella. It was about 80 pages long, and it was the final thing that I needed to read by Abby Jimenez in order to have completed her entire backlist. So this follows our 2 main characters. They are neighbors. They are the only 2 people living on the 2nd floor in this one block of an apartment complex, and they live across from each other. And one day they wake up and their staircase is missing, gone. And when they contact their landlord, they realize that the people who are there working on the apartment complex took the wrong stairs. They were supposed to take a different set of stairs. But it's Friday, it's the weekend, they're not coming back until Monday. And so these 2 people are essentially kind of like trapped in their apartments until their staircase is brought back. And so naturally the 2 start to get to know each other, feelings developed, and so on. And again, it was just such a cute, sweet, fun time. Abby Jimenez, even in a short few amount of pages, really makes you start to feel for the characters and root for their relationship. This is one of those stories that kind of left you wanting more, and I think that's a good sign of like a strong novella. So this was a great way to start the year, and I gave this a 4 stars. These next 2 I'm going to mention, but I'm not going to talk in depth about my feelings because they were Patreon reads, and my thoughts and feelings about these books are exclusive to the Patreon. So the first book was Best Offer Wins by Marisa Kashino, which was my Patreon book club pick. And then the second was We Don't Talk About Carol by Kristen Berry, which was the patron pick for the month of January. I did successfully complete both of the books and I enjoyed them both. All right, and then next I read a historical fiction that unfortunately was a bit of a dud for me. It was the newest release from Susan Meissner called A Map to Paradise. This was actually one of the only remaining 2025 anticipated releases that I had not yet read, and so I wanted to go ahead and get it out of the way when it came off of hold from my library. I have really enjoyed Susan Meissner in the past, which is one of the reasons why I still continue to pick her up despite the fact that I have moved quite far away from historical fiction, and I was really looking forward to this one, but unfortunately it just did not live up to my expectations. So this is essentially set in the 1950s in Southern California. I believe it's set in Malibu, and it follows 3 women. The first is Melanie, and she is a new Hollywood starlet. She just got her first starring role in a film, and she's now really, really popular, but she also now finds herself on the Hollywood blacklist because it is believed that she is consorting with communists, or at least she is consorting with somebody who is a communist or routinely hangs out with communists. You know what I mean? So she's currently hiding out in a Malibu rental that is being paid for by the lover who is suspected of being a communist. And she is basically on her own. She really is not talking to anybody but her housekeeper, Ava. Now, Ava is a displaced person from World War II. She is passing herself off as Polish, but she is actually a German born in Russia. And there is a whole reason why she's trying to pass herself off as Polish and why she doesn't really want anybody to know her true heritage. And you find out more about that throughout the story. But again, Melanie is not really talking to anybody but her, as well as becoming friends with her reclusive neighbor, Elwood. Elwood, 10 years prior, was the cause of an accident that killed the love of his life, and he's never really recovered from that. He doesn't leave his house, he just stays there, and his sister-in-law, June, is there as his caretaker. And one morning, Melanie and Ava kind of witnessed June in the backyard messing around with Elwood's roses, which they know Elwood would never allow because he absolutely loves those rose bushes, but June claims that he asked her to. But when Melanie Melanie asks to speak with Elwood, June is kind of cagey and says no, he doesn't want to talk to anybody, and Melanie becomes worried when she continuously can't reach Elwood and she doesn't hear from him. So when June hurts her back, in the guise of being helpful, Melanie offers June Ava for a few hours every day to kind of help with the house and everything like that. But Melanie really wants Ava to kind of be a double agent. She wants Ava to confirm Elwood's well-being and report back to Melanie. But Ava becomes friends with June and she's not really willing to complete her mission, so to speak. And soon all three women and their lives become very intertwined as some secrets are revealed and they have to kind of work together to keep each other safe. So ultimately, I really enjoyed the premise of the book. I was intrigued by it and I really wanted to see what secrets these women were hiding. But my problem with this story was the choice that the author made with regard to each character's backstory. So the fact that Melanie was a Hollywood starlet on the blacklist for communist associations or apparent communist associations really had no bearing on this story whatsoever. The only thing that really mattered about it was the fact that it was the 50s and that was obviously a very big concern in America in the 1950s. So it gave time period context, but that is literally it. Susan Meissner could have picked any other background for Melanie and it likely would have been fine. Same with Ava, right? There really was no point or purpose to the fact that Ava was a displaced person. Yes, she definitely had secrets that she was keeping and there was a reason she was keeping them. But again, she could have had any other background, any other secrets, and it would have been absolutely fine. So her status as a displaced person was not really relevant overall to the story. And also there were some choices that were made in here that absolutely had no relevance on the plot and I don't know why they were included. So for example, one of them was the fact that Melanie's brother, a strange brother who she hasn't seen in 7 years, tracks her down, brings his son, who Melanie has never met, and then he just ups and abandons his son with her. But does that have any effect on the story? No, it was completely out of left field. It did not further the plot whatsoever. And it was just really baffled by a lot of the choices that Susan Meissner made in here. The story did not feel cohesive. I don't think that the story really knew what it was trying to do or what it was trying to be. And ultimately, I just found that really confusing. I almost DNF'd this probably at least once or twice, but then there would be pockets of time in the story that I did find legitimately intriguing and I wanted to continue. And so I did. I don't really feel much benefit from having continued with it. So I think I settled on a 2.5 stars for this one, but I might be even willing to lower that to a 2 stars. Thankfully, the book that I read after that was a much stronger reading experience, and that was the newest release from John Marrs called Dead in the Water. I was actually kindly sent an ALC of this from NetGalley, and I was so excited to receive it. This is John Marrs' newest psychological thriller, and it is honestly one of the most unique thrillers that I have ever had the pleasure of reading. So the main premise of the story follows our main character, Damon. At the beginning of the story, he drowns. He has a near-death experience. And of course, during this time, as the cliche says, his life flashes before his eyes. And while all the memories shown to him are ones that, he really remembers for the most part, there is one that he does not remember. And it's of a young boy covered in blood, dead. And after he's resuscitated, he still holds on to this memory and he is so confused by it. But worst of all, he realizes that he has kind of brought this boy back with him. He is now hallucinating this boy and he becomes obsessed. He becomes desperate to learn who this boy is and how he is connected to him. And he thinks that the only way that he is going to be able to do this is by dying. And so over the course of the story, several times, and with the help of some other people, including his ex-wife, who I believe is a nurse or a paramedic, he puts himself at the brink of death and then is resuscitated. And every single time this happens, he comes back with more and more memory, but he also brings back more and more dead people from his past. And so you are kind of following him and his obsession as he is trying to learn exactly what all of this means. Unfortunately, of course, what surfaces through this process are long buried memories that reveal horrific secrets from Damon's past, right? And this is a situation where secrets are better left buried. So yes, like I said, this novel was unlike anything that I've ever read, but I must caution you that it is really, really dark. So I would encourage you to look up trigger warnings because there are all kinds of things going on in this story. And I am not entirely sure what I was expecting going into this book, but it definitely far exceeded my expectations. And it gave me a story that was twisty, it was inventive, it was bold, and it had me hooked like from start to finish. I absolutely wanted to know what happened. Now, I do quickly want to say that this book does feature a connection to an earlier release of John Marrs called The Good Samaritan. There's a character here that I believe is one of the main characters in The Good Samaritan. Now, I've never read The Good Samaritan, so obviously you can read Dead in the Water without having read The Good Samaritan, and you would be just fine. However, I have read some reviews that say that if you haven't read The Good Samaritan, you are not necessarily going to have the same reading experience. So apparently it's supposed to strengthen your reading experience of Dead in the Water if you've read The Good Samaritan. However, I will say that I don't really feel like the character featured in this story needed to be there. I feel like they could have been eliminated entirely, and it wouldn't necessarily have hurt the story either way. Like I said, I really enjoyed this one a lot from start to finish, and I don't feel like my reading experience was hindered at all by not having read The Good Samaritan. I give this a solid 4.25 stars, and if you have read and enjoyed John Marrs in the past, I definitely recommend this one. The next book that I finished in the month of January was A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett, and unfortunately, I just do not love this series as much as everybody else seemed to. I really wanted to. I really wish that I did, but unfortunately, it just doesn't work for me. If you're not familiar, this is a genre blend of fantasy and mystery. It is essentially a fantastical Sherlock Holmes retelling. We are following two main characters, one fitting the Sherlock Holmes character and one fitting the Watson-style character. And in this story, they are always solving some really intensely complicated mystery. And a lot of other people who dislike this series, they typically name the mystery side of this as the reason why they don't like it, because they're not really big fans of mysteries or detective fiction or anything like that. So that part of the story doesn't work for them. However, it's what actually worked for me. What really didn't work for me are the fantastical elements in this story. This was never a fantastical world that I could ground myself in. I don't necessarily feel like the world was super well developed, and the magic system itself, in my opinion, was certainly not well developed. But the world to me, again, just felt very abstract, a little bit chaotic and all over the place, and I never really could get a solid footing in here, so I never connected to the world, and I never connected to the characters. I really don't feel like the main characters in here had much personality. Like, there wasn't a lot of emotional depth coming in from these stories, so I was never emotionally connected to the main characters or any of the side characters or anything like that. This is definitely more of a plot-driven story, in my opinion, than a character-driven story, and so there was definitely a huge disconnect while I was reading. And even though I do love the mystery aspect, because the mysteries in these stories are absolutely clever, they are complex, right? And I appreciated that, but it's not enough for me to want to continue with this series. So unfortunately, I don't think that I will be continuing in the next book in this series. I think that I gave this like a 3 or a 3.5 stars, and even though I definitely applaud Robert Jackson Bennett for the complexity of the mysteries that he is able to put in here, unfortunately, it's the fantastical side of this that doesn't work for me. The next book that I finished in January was An Academic Affair by Jodi McAlister, and y'all, this was such a pleasant surprise. This is actually a rivals to lovers romance that is set in academia, and I absolutely ate it up. This is one that I grabbed tentatively from Book of the Month back when it was featured, I think back in November, because I really wanted some of the add-ons from that month. None of the main selections really appealed to me. This was the only one that came close to being something that I could be interested in reading, so I grabbed it, and I was not really in the mood to read it. I didn't know if I was going to like it, but I thought that this was great. So this follows our two main characters, Jonah Fisher and Sadie Shaw, and they have been academic rivals since their first year in their undergraduate program of literary studies, and this rivalry followed them through grad school and then through their doctoral program, and now they are both PhDs in academia in the working world, and they find themselves rivals for jobs, right? Because their field is so niche and there's not a lot of open opportunities. But they are just now getting to the point in their relationship where they're kind of willing to call a truce. They're both starting to see each other as real human people, and they're starting to like work on an actual friendship. But then one day, a dream job for both of them opens up, and they once again kind of have to resume their rivalry. They both go for the job, and Sadie gets it. But she knows that Jonah really wanted the job because he wanted to move to where this job was so he could be closer to his sister, who is newly divorced. She has 3 children. She's struggling to take care of them, and he wanted to be there for her. And so when Sadie finds out that this university offers partner hire, she ends up offering a solution to Jonah. All they have to do is get legally married, and he could potentially also get a job at this university. And so that is what they do, and it goes from there. Like I said, y'all, this turned out to be such a completely unexpected surprise for me. It is truly one of the most believable and well-plotted marriage of convenience tropes I ever read. Like, I absolutely bought that this is something that could potentially happen. You know what I mean? I thought that it was very well written. I loved the banter between the two main characters, and I also thought that the development of their relationship was very realistic because, you know, they have 15 years of backstory. They've known each other since their first year in undergrad, and even though the majority of their lives have been spent as academic rivals, they still know each other pretty well. And so the development of their feelings really did feel very natural, especially as they're settling into their role as this married couple and having to do married couple things and all of this stuff. And so I just thought that this was absolutely delightful, very well written. Of course, I love the setting of academia as somebody who does currently work in higher education, and some of the complaints and concerns that they voiced about academia in the story, I could absolutely relate to. And so this was just such a delight for me. I'm so glad that I liked it way more than I was expecting, and I gave this a solid 4 stars. All right, and then the next book that I finished in January was unfortunately yet another pretty big dud. It was the newest release from Darby Kane called Such a Clever Girl. This was yet another advanced listener copy that I obtained from NetGalley. Now, I have enjoyed Darby Kane in the past. 2 of her books I really enjoyed, and so when I saw that she was coming out with a new one and I saw it was available on NetGalley, I requested it because it was on my anticipated releases for the year. year, and I wanted an opportunity to get to it as soon as possible. And unfortunately, this was a very, very big letdown for me. I struggled with this book immensely. I almost DNF'd it twice, once at the 16% mark, once at the 75% mark, but I wanted to ultimately know what was going to happen, and so I pushed through, and by the end of it, I didn't really feel like it was worth pushing through. I was honestly really surprised by the campiness of this story in comparison to some of Darby Kane's other releases. In fact, in my review, I called this like Desperate Housewives, but without the actual housewives. So the ultimate premise of this story is that 15 years prior to present day, the Tanner family disappeared. It was the husband Patrick, his wife, his teenage daughter Aubrey, and then their young son Noah. They disappeared without a trace, and nobody has seen or heard from them since. Nobody knows what happened. Are they dead? Are they alive? What have you? And then in the current day, Xavier Tanner, who was Patrick's father and a kind of patriarch of this very, very wealthy, powerful family, passes away. And of course, when he passes away, this becomes a catalyst for chaos, because as soon as it's known that he's passed away, Aubrey Tanner makes a triumphant return. She is now 30, and she kind of has her own agenda. She is stirring up chaos. She wants some secrets to be revealed. And naturally, there's this whole big will reading scene when some more secrets are revealed and things kind of progress from there. The story progresses primarily through three perspectives. We have Hannah, who is the owner of a local cafe, but she used to work for Patrick, and there's also another tie that she has to the Tanner family that you find out throughout the story. Then we also have Marnie, who was Victoria's best friend, the wife who went missing, but she also has yet another connection to this family that is revealed. And then finally, we have Stella, who was Aubrey's cousin, so she was Xavier's great niece. And all of these women have some secrets. They were all there on the night that the Tanner family went missing at different intervals, and so they're kind of hiding secrets about what they know about what happened that night. And Aubrey, of course, is coming in. She knows the secrets that these ladies are hiding, and she's determined to reveal them, but she's also determined to take her revenge for specific actions that happened to her in her childhood. Now, Aubrey does have a scattered perspective through the story, and she was a big problem for me. I really, really hated her character. She was relentlessly obnoxious and infuriating. It's clear that she is meant to be an unsettling character, potentially sociopathic, but she was one of those characters that was constantly using these smug riddles and vague threats and never coming outright and saying what she knew. And I don't know, I just found her really, really frustrating, and I kind of wish that we didn't get her perspective at all. But ultimately, I just felt this story was very uninspired, and I felt like it relied on tropes that never quite rose above their cliche, right? So you have rich people behaving badly, you have a cast of deeply unlikable characters, you have this whole big will reading scene that goes awry and chaos ensues and is a catalyst for everything that comes in the story. And then of course you have this grand estate that becomes one of the main settings of the story, and there's something very specific within this estate that becomes a big plot device for the story as well. And I don't really want to say more about what that was because it's definitely going to be a spoiler, but it was very, very contrived, very unbelievable. It was absolutely there as a plot device to further the story. So in my opinion, the story was not well executed. It wasn't particularly unique. It wasn't particularly shocking. The mystery never felt to me as clever as it wanted to be. It definitely leaned heavily on convenience, and in the end, it just felt way more soap opera than psychological thriller, right? So definitely more Desperate Housewives vibes than anything else. And I don't know, I just like really, really disliked this story, y'all. So I gave this a 2 stars and was very, very frustrated by my reading experience. Thankfully, this next book was also a winner, and it was definitely a surprise because I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did. And that is The Bright Years by Sarah Damoff. Now, I first heard about this book last year when I was doing a Book of the Month prediction video. I included it in that video as a prediction, and at the time I put it on my wish list and proceeded to completely forget about it. But I did ultimately get this in my advent calendar in December and never got around to reading it, and so it came in from my library in January and went ahead and jumped on the opportunity to get to it. Now, I was really worried about this because I did know it was going to be a little bit more literary, and also it's really, really short, and I'm very, very cautious when it comes to shorter books because I never believe that it's going to give me the development that I'm looking for. But thankfully, this actually packed quite a big punch for how short it was. Now, I do think that the shortness of this definitely impacted the punch. I think if it had been like maybe 100 pages longer, it definitely would have been better developed. It wouldn't have felt as rushed, and it would have been more emotional. But I do believe for the page count, it packed more of a punch than I was expecting. So this is essentially told from 3 perspectives. The first is Lillian, and the first part of the story follows her relationship as she meets Ryan. They fall in love, they get married, they have a baby, and then kind of like the deterioration of their marriage. So this is following their relationship over a couple of decades even. So of course, naturally, because this book is so short, you're only getting a couple of pages in each year as you're following the development of this relationship. And then at a certain point in the story, something pretty big and pretty tragic happens. And at that point, we are shifting perspectives to Georgette's point of view. And I believe this happens in the early aughts. And then the story ends with Ryan's perspective as an older gentleman. So of course, at its core, this is a family drama. This is the Bright family and all of the trials and tribulations of their lives, their loves, and their relationship. And like I said, I do believe that the length of the story definitely hurt the impact, but I do still feel like it did a really great job of introducing you to these characters, of having you get to know the characters and care about them and what they were going through. There were definitely a lot of heavy themes in here, including alcohol addiction. There is definitely loss and grief. There's also a subplot line in here of a baby that Lillian gave up for adoption before she met Ryan that comes into play later on down the road in Georgette's perspective, although I don't really feel like it had a lot to do with the story overall. I don't feel like that needed to be there and just be one more thing that you're having to follow through this very, very short story. I will say that one of my biggest complaints about the story is the very randomly inserted pop culture references. You can just tell that Sarah Damoff was putting those in there to ground you in the years because they moved so quickly. Like I said, you would only be getting typically a few pages per year. And so randomly you would just be reading and then they would throw in a pop culture reference. I think like one of them was the O.J. Simpson car chase or something like that. They would just like randomly throw things in there. And I was like, that is actually very disorienting and it takes me out of the story rather than keeps me in it. I don't think that they were well placed. I don't think that they were cohesive and they kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. And so that was like one of my biggest gripes about this and the length of the story. But ultimately, I still found this to be very, very strong. She has a new release coming out in 2026, and I think that I would absolutely want to read it. These next two stories are actually continuations of YA series, and so I'm not really going to touch upon them much here, but I do want to mention them because I did read them. So the first was Namesake by Adrienne Young. If you remember, this is actually the book that I plan to read to satisfy the pirate category of our fantasy bingo, and this was so kindly gifted to me by Jarrett, one of my patrons, so thank you so much to Jarrett. And also, I forgot to mention that The Bright Years was gifted to me by Andrea. Thank you, Andrea. And actually, I was really nervous to get to this because it had been so long since I read Fable. Like, I read Fable back when I would still consider myself actively a YA fan, and that was my first experience with Adrienne Young, and now I'm fully invested in her as like an adult author. But I did read a recap of Fable. I was ready to go into this, and I really, really enjoyed this. I had a great time. I think this is such a solid YA pirate series. Fable definitely feels like a very strong, mature, capable young woman in here, and I really, really enjoyed following her and just the overall plot of the story. I thought that it was very well written, and I highly recommend, especially if you are still reading YA fantasy and you love a good pirate story, definitely recommend picking up Fable and then Namesake, and this helped me complete our fantasy bingo for sure. And then next I read Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This of course is the second book in the Caraval series. I'm very late to the game on this series. The only reason why I decided to pick it up at all was because Fairy Loot decided that they were going to release the whole series in this beautiful, beautiful special edition set, and I knew I just had to have it. So I picked up Caraval on a whim early last year. I would say like in May, I was able to use that for our fantasy bingo, and I decided that I was going to go ahead and purchase the set, but I still needed to continue. So I put Legendary on my 26 in 26, and I'm really glad to have gotten to it in January. I think I enjoyed this one more than I enjoyed Caraval, and that was surprising to me because this one follows Donatella, who is the sister to the main character Scarlet, who we follow in Caraval. But I just really enjoyed the plot of Legendary more than I did Caraval. I thought that I was able to follow it more easily. I thought that it was a little bit more complicated, a little bit more intricate, and even a little bit darker in my opinion. And I actually really liked the budding romance in here between Donatella and another character way more than I enjoyed the budding romance between Scarlet and Julian in the first book. Like, I never really vibed or connected with that romance. I didn't really care about it at all, but I became deeply invested in the romance between Donatella and this other character who we do meet in the first book as well. So ultimately, I was pleasantly surprised by my reading experience of this. Again, this is another one that I'm worried about because there is a sense of whimsy to this story as it is taking place during like this very grand magical game. But thankfully, I did enjoy this one, and I gave it a 3.5 stars. Like, this series to me is not incredibly super amazing or anything like that, but I do still have a good time while I'm reading it. And like I said, I do think this was stronger than Caraval. And then the very final book that I managed to finish in the month of January was This Summer Will Be Different by Carley Fortune. This is actually a book that was scheduled for my February TBR. However, it came in from my library just like a day or two after I filmed my TBR video, and I wasn't going to bypass the opportunity to listen to it. And this just cements Carley Fortune as like an auto-buy romance author for me. She honestly became an auto-buy romance author for me after reading Every Summer After, which I loved. That was such a big surprise for me. That was an easy 5 stars. I haven't loved her other books as much as Every Summer After, but I do think that this is a strong, solid second for me. So this follows our main character, Lucy. She lives in Toronto and she works at a flower shop that she now owns. She inherited it from her aunt. And at the start of the story, we see her as she is heading to Prince Edward Island for the first time. And she's going there because her best friend Bridget's family lives there. That's where she grew up. And so they're going to return there so Lucy can meet Bridget's family and hang out and everything like that. But during this first summer there, Bridget is actually delayed by a couple of days. So Lucy gets there to the island on her own. She heads to this restaurant where she meets a guy named Felix, and they have this instant spark, instant attraction, and they wind up sleeping together and having a really really great time. But unbeknownst to Lucy, Felix is actually Bridget's brother, but she only knows Bridget's brother as Wolf. That's his nickname. That's the only way that Bridget ever refers to him. And so she had no idea this guy was Bridget's brother. So naturally, she feels very, very awkward about it, especially because Bridget kind of gave her a warning not to fall in love with her brother, simply because her brother has recently gone through a really, really terrible breakup. Felix was in a relationship with Bridget's former best friend. I think her name might have been Joy. I can't remember off the top of her head, but she really doesn't want to go through that experience again. So she kind of tells Bridget, don't fall in love with my brother. Obviously, Bridget is being very overprotective and dramatic, but Lucy kind of takes this seriously. And so when she finds out that Felix is Bridget's brother, she's like, oh my gosh, we can never, ever do it again. But of course, over the next few years, as Lucy returns to Prince Edward Island, or if Felix goes out to Toronto, they kind of always wind up in bed together. So this story is actually told in the present day with flashes back to those 5 summers. And in the present day, Bridget is actually scheduled to be married to a wonderful man named Milo. And Lucy is very stressed because she's going to be doing all the flowers for the wedding. And one day she gets this very frantic and panicked call from Bridget saying, I'm in Prince Edward Island and I need you to come out here. And naturally, Lucy is floored. Like, what is Bridget doing out there, right? She's supposed to be getting married in Toronto in like 9 days. All of this stuff is happening. There's supposed to be a dress fitting. What is going on? But Lucy is not really willing to abandon Bridget, right? Bridget is her best friend, her soulmate, and she would do anything for her. So she drops absolutely everything and flies out to Prince Edward Island. And Bridget is being very, very secretive. She's not really willing to tell Lucy what is going on or why she's so upset, why she required Lucy to go out there. But Felix is also out there and they're kind of spending all of this time together. And of course, Lucy is trying to deal with her feelings for Felix because over the past 5 summers, she started to notice that her feelings are growing from just being okay with this casual relationship to wanting a little bit more. I ultimately had a great time with this. I really like the way that Carley Fortune is able to weave together the present day perspective with the past timelines. That doesn't always work for me in books. In fact, a lot of the times I feel like the past perspective, even though it might be necessary, kind of takes me out of the story, especially if I'm really invested in the present time. But I feel like Carley Fortune does it well. And because she does it well, she's able to develop the characters and the relationship in such an authentic way that the reader gets to really know and emotionally connect to the characters and root for them. I feel like her characters are very layered and nuanced and very well developed in her romances, which is one of the reasons why I enjoy them so much as a character-driven reader. And I also appreciated some of the more harder-hitting aspects that were in here. There was a mention of grief because Lucy did lose her aunt, which was one of the people that she connected to most in the world. She never felt understood by her parents, but she felt understood by her aunt. And now she feels like she's losing Bridget too because Bridget is getting married and Lucy kind of feels like she is on her own. So there are definitely some deeper things going on in this story, as there are in all of Carley Fortune's stories. And I really had a great time with this. I do think that this is my second favorite. I think One Golden Summer is my third, and then Meet Me at the Lake is my fourth. But I really do love all of Carley Fortune's stories. I'm very much looking forward to the new release that is coming out, I think in May. I will absolutely be picking that up as soon as possible. And I gave this a solid 4 stars. All right, everybody, that is it. Those are all the books that I read in the month of January. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of the books that I discussed in this video and what your thoughts are. I would love to know. Or if you've made it to the end of this video and you are not feeling chatty, go ahead and leave me a water emoji in honor of This Summer Will Be Different, or even Dead in the Water by John Marrs. 2 very, very different stories, but water definitely does play a role in both of them. And as always, if you like this video or if you just like me, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's free for you, but it helps my channel so much with the algorithm and it definitely keeps me motivated. And as always, I would love to give a special shout out to my patrons. I love and appreciate each and every one of you, and I am so incredibly grateful for you and our small community. If you would like to join this wonderful community that we have built, I always have it linked down below along with all of my other social media. Until next time, y'all. Bye.